Hello everyone, Jolene here from Bookworm Adventure Girl. Welcome back. I hope that you are all doing well. And if you are new, thanks so much for checking out my channel. Please hit subscribe and stick around. If you've been on BookTube for a minute or so, then you probably already know that Nonfiction November is just a few sleeps away. This is an event that is hosted by Olive at A Book Olive. She is lovely, and the whole idea is to get people reading more nonfiction. For me, that's a good thing because so far this year I've read over 110 books, and out of those 110 plus books, only 12 of them were nonfiction. So I do read nonfiction, but it seems only about maybe 10% or so. And if this is something that you want to check out or you want to try, I will leave a link to Olive's channel and to the several videos that she has done to kick off the event and the books that she has recommended. So today I am going to share 13 nonfiction books that are on my radar for next month. Now I've shared a few nonfiction books in, I would say, my last couple of videos, but the books that I'm going to share today are all books that I haven't read yet, including some that are, I would say, among the nonfiction books that have been on my TBR the longest, some of them a very long time. Olive has given 4 prompts that people can choose to follow along with or not. It's up to you. They are also very open to interpretation, which I do like as well. The 4 prompts are border, element, record, and secret. And I haven't really put any of these books into categories. And that's something that, for me, if it works out, great. But if it doesn't, I'm okay with that too. If you have read any of the books that I'm about to talk about, and you have ideas about which categories you think they fit in, please let me know. That would help me a great deal, so put that in the comments below. I'm going to start off with 2 books that I received this month from publishers. One is a memoir and the other is a biography. And the memoir is from Douglas and McIntyre, and it's called Chasing Rivers, A Whitewater Life by Canadian author Tamar Glouberman. I hope I'm saying that correctly. In this memoir, Tamar shares her story, her love of the natural world, and her experiences in her 20s and 30s as a whitewater guide. And I love this quote. As a short woman who nearly failed high school gym, Glouberman does not fit the stereotype of a kayaker or raft guide and must prove herself time and again. Yet she feels more at home on water than land. So in the book, Tamar tells of a rafting trip that ends in a fatal accident and how that affected her and how she decided to move forward. The biography is from St. Martin's Press, and this came out on October 11th, and it is called Wild, The Life of Peter Beard, and this is by Boynton. And I confess that I know nothing about Peter Beard. All I know of the guy is what I have learned from the publisher. What I learned from the publisher was intriguing enough that I thought, whoever this Peter Beard guy is, I want to know more about him. So I do hope to read this during Nonfiction November. Many of you probably already know way more than I about Peter Beard. I know that he was a photographer and considered a larger-than-life icon who pushed the boundaries of art and scandalized international high society with his high-profile affairs. So in 2020, Peter Beard died, but from the little bit I know so far, he lived a rather large and adventurous life, so I look forward to learning more about it. The author Boynton was a friend of Peter Beard's for more than 30 years, so I also kind of like knowing that the story was in the hands of someone who really cared about him. At least I hope so. So let me know in the comments if you already know who Peter Beard is. Am I the only one who doesn't know him? It's possible. Speaking of not knowing someone, you might remember, if you think way back to January of this year, I talked about the Canada Reads competition that was going on. And when I was introducing the 5 defenders, I had only heard of one of them at the time, Tarek had, who actually has a book out that would actually work for Nonfiction November, but I don't have a copy of that book, and that one's going to have to wait just a little bit longer for me. The others were an actor, a fashion writer, an ecologist, and an Olympian. And it turns out that the Olympian, Mark Tewksbury, is also a Calgarian, and it doesn't live too far away. After the debates were over, Mark and his partner Rob were kind enough to give me a tour of the Calgary Public Library, and they shared their experiences of Canada Reads, which I shared with all of you, and I will leave a link to that video in the description box below so you can go and check that out. I then picked up 2 of Mark's books, one of them being Inside Out, Straight Talk from a Gay Jock. I've actually already started this book, but then I got caught up in other books. I know, surprise. The BookTube Prize and the Giller, among many other things. So I ended up deciding that I would put this on hold until November. So I have joked with Mark and Rob about how the world knows who Mark is as an Olympian, and I know him as a reader and defender on Canada Reads. But in reality, I do know that there's, way more to the story and more to who Mark is. So I want to give the book the time that it deserves. From what I've read so far, I can already tell that I am going to really enjoy this book. Full disclosure, that Mark shared some of his story with me. So I found that when I was reading the book, I could hear his voice and could imagine him telling me the stories. It was almost like he was sitting in my living room with me, telling me, about his childhood and his relationship with his grandmother, how he got started in swimming. So, in some ways, I think reading this feels a little bit more personal than reading some of the other memoirs. And I'm looking forward to finally getting back to this one. Up next is a book that has been on my TBR for a very long time, and I am so glad that I'm finally getting to it. And that is H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald. I will be reading this along with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, since this is her 1001 book club pick for November. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we all love this. Sandy said in her video where she introduced this book for the club that she will be using it for the prompt border, since there is a border around the cover. So that works for me too. This story is about how Helen MacDonald decides to train her own hawk after the death of her father. And I have a feeling that this will be an engaging story about grief and the relationship between Mabel, who is the hawk, and Helen, and how that relationship will bring some healing. So we will see if I'm right. The next 2 books I have on this pile are books about real people who wrote a book about their stories, and then a film was made. So I'm going to start with Gesundheit, bringing good health. Bringing good health to you, the medical system, and society through physician service, complementary therapies, humor, and joy. If none of that sounds familiar to you, then you might know the author. This is by Patch Adams, who was played by Robin Williams in the film Patch Adams. So I absolutely loved that film and the story. And I'm sure that it was Hollywoodized a bit, and this book has sat on my shelf for a very long time. So I'm hoping to finally get to it. I'm hoping to learn, obviously more about Patch Adams as a person, but also learn about his big dream of offering free healthcare to people worldwide. His vision of healthcare is quite remarkable from the little bit that I do know of it. This next book has also been one that's been on my TBR a long time, and it is also a film. It starred Tom Cruise and came out in 1989, and that is Born on the 4th of July by Ron Kovic, who is a Vietnam vet. He was very badly injured, and after returning home, he became an anti-war advocate and spokesperson. And I actually can't believe that I haven't read this yet, so I do hope to get to it. You can even see like the coloring of the pages. It's pretty bad. Next up, I have a classic, which was also turned into a film, and that is 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup. I have seen this film, and some of it was very difficult to watch, so I can only imagine what this read is going to be like, but I think it's an important one. Solomon Northup was born free in New York State, but in 1841 he was kidnapped in Washington City. He was then sold into slavery and kept in bondage in Louisiana and was rescued in 1853. So this is going to be an incredibly powerful slave narrative. So I'm going to stick with the theme of paving the way for others and making an impact with Buses Are Comin', Memoir of a Freedom Rider, and this is by Charles Person with Richard Rooker. And I've talked about this book, I would say at least a couple of times now, and here it still sits unread. Charles Person was 18 and the youngest of the Freedom Riders in 1961. He was on the second bus. The first bus was burned to a shell, and his bus was set upon by a mob that beat the riders nearly to death. This is Charles's first-hand account, and this will be the first time that I read a book about the Freedom Riders. This next book is one that has been on my TBR the longest out of my nonfiction, and it is one of the few books that my mother has read. If you watched my mom do the Atwood Adventure Tag earlier this year, then you might remember that she is not a reader, but she has read this book, and you would have heard her talk about this book. And that is Yes, I Can by Sammy Davis Jr. So this is the only book that my mother has mentioned to me over and over and over again, and this has been sitting on my shelf, I would say, for at least 20 years, based on my mother's recommendation. And she may not remember this, but I asked her after we did the tag video if she'd like to read this together with me. It's a commitment. And she said yes. So I'm hoping she sticks to her word. So Mom, if you're watching, we are going to read this together in November, which is also my mom's birthday month. So happy birthday, we're going to read a book together. Of course, I'm also assuming that everyone knows who Sammy Davis Jr. is. So he was a singer, a comedian, an actor, and he was part of the Rat Pack, along with Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra. Because Sammy Davis Jr. was a black man, there were different rules for him as a performer, and the rest of the Rat Pack wouldn't play in places that he wasn't allowed. And there's just a lot of stories about those days and how this group of singers helped pave the way for many people who, came after them. So I'm looking forward to reading this, hopefully with my mom, and finally seeing why this book captivated her so much, especially since she's not a reader. Up next is a book that I mentioned in my recent book haul visit, and that is An Edible History of Humanity by Tom Standage. This book looks at how food has made an impact in changing the course of human progress. And I think that this is going to be interesting, and my hope is that it will change how I think about food and make me think of it in ways that I, have never really thought of before. I love when a book is able to do that. So that leaves me with the final 3 books, which are all about women and the impact on women and maybe the impact women have had. I hope that's true. The first two books that I want to mention have also been part of the book haul revisit that I did. And the first is Spolexum, A Weaving of Recovery, Resilience, and Resurgence by Nicola Campbell. This is an Indigenous woman's story, and I like reading Indigenous stories. I don't have a lot of details about this one, but I know that it will have some difficult topics like intergenerational trauma. I also know that the author uses different elements to tell this story, so I was thinking of using this book for that prompt, or I could use it for record as well. We will see. As with many Indigenous stories, I'm sure that there will be some really hard realities, but I also know that most of the Indigenous authors that I read, if not all, they offer hope as well, and these stories are so important for us to read and to learn from. The next book is Maiden Voyages, Magnificent Ocean Liners and the Women Who Traveled and Worked Aboard Them by Sean Evans. When I talked about this in my revisit video, I said that women and ocean liners are not something that I make an immediate connection with, but I look forward to seeing how this author does this and talks about women's lives through this lens. So there will hopefully be a variety of characters, as there are stories of celebrities and refugees and migrants and crew members and many others. So I think that it will be a unique look at class and various roles of women. And then the final book is one that I don't have, but that I am very interested in. I will put a picture of it up, and it's called Skirts, Fashioning Modern Femininity in the 20th Century. And this is by Kimberly Crisman Campbell. So this book looks at the shifting roles of women through the lens of the dresses and skirts that were worn throughout the 20th century. So as a woman who is not much of a dress or skirt wearer, this is very intriguing to me, and I like the idea of taking objects, and in this case fashion, and seeing things from a different perspective. So this is one that I might pick up if I can. Not that I need more books, but this one sounds good. And I do already have more books on this list than I've read so far this year, so I don't expect to get to all of these, but I like having a variety of options. So please let me know if you have read any of these, if you are interested in any of these, if you would put any of these with certain prompts that Olive has given us. I'd also be interested in hearing what you are most excited to read for Nonfiction November, if you are going to participate and be part of this event. So I look forward to chatting with you in the comments. Thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.